All right, guys, we're going to look at one more text today about the War of 1812. And then tomorrow, you've worked very hard for me this week. This is the third text you've had to listen to or read and answer questions on. Tomorrow, I'll take it easy on you, okay? We'll just do a Declaration of Independence, a Star Spangled Banner Day, and you won't have any questions to answer tomorrow, just some things to watch, okay? But we need to make sure we understand and get these facts about the War of 1812 down in our minds. And then next week, midweek sometime, I don't have it planned yet, we'll be taking a test on President George Washington's presidency, Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery, and then the War of 1812. So we'll have a test next week. So this is kind of the last major lesson on the War of 1812. So make sure you pay attention today and read this text carefully and go answer the questions when we're done, okay? So this is from ReadWorks, and this text is called Mr. Madison's War, and it's about the War of 1812. We'll find out why it was called that as we read the text together. James Madison was elected president during a complicated time for the United States. Madison was no stranger to the American people. In fact, people were already calling Madison the father of the Constitution because of his contributions to the Constitutional Convention. He'd served in the Congress for many years. He'd helped get the Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. He'd helped Thomas Jefferson form the Democratic Republican Party. He'd served as Jefferson's Secretary of State. He had done a lot for the government, hadn't he? When Madison was elected president, the United States was already struggling to maintain peace with Great Britain and France, two countries, as we've read, that were at war with each other. Thomas Jefferson had tried and failed to stop Great Britain and France from seizing American ships at sea. And in the case of Great Britain, seizing American soldiers. Do you remember what that is called? When they took our sailors, and kept them as prisoners on their Navy ships, that was called impressment. You need to know that word, impressment. As president, Madison was no more successful than Jefferson had been in dealing with Great Britain and France. Once, France tricked him into believing that they would leave American ships alone. Madison wanted so badly to believe the French that even after everyone else saw they were not keeping their word, Madison still said they were. Americans were angry at France, but they were even angrier at Great Britain. Great Britain not only seized American ships, but they also were seizing American sailors and forcing them to serve in the British Navy. They were also angry because of the Northwest Territory. Native Americans were attacking American settlements, killing some settlers, driving away others. Why should Americans blame Great Britain for that? Because the Native Americans were getting their guns from the British government in Canada. Some Westerners thought the only way to stop the attacks was to drive the British out of Canada. Congress talked more and more about war with Great Britain. Some congressmen said the United States must defend its honor against the British Navy. There were even people who wanted the United States to have Canada for itself and were willing to go to war to get it. Congressmen who talked this way became known as war hawks. Most of them were younger men who had not fought in the American Revolution or the various wars fought against Native Americans. Some had not even been born when the War for Independence happened. These men did not know, at least not from their own experience, how terrible war can be. To them, war was all about glory. They were eager to fight. It would be all so easy, they thought. Why, the Kentucky militia could take Canada all by itself, said one of them. He was from Kentucky, of course. Older Americans, such as James Madison, knew more about the war. They really hoped to avoid it. In the end, the pressure from his own party was too much for President Madison. In 1812, he asked Congress to declare war against Great Britain, and Congress quickly did. Those who opposed the war called it Mr. Madison's War. That's the title of this text. You might think that if a country plans to go to war, it would at least prepare for it. The United States, though, was almost completely unprepared. American leaders talked about taking on the British Navy with its 600 ships, while the U.S. Navy had only 16. U.S. leaders talked about driving the British out of Canada, while the U.S. Army only had about 7,000 soldiers. It's not surprising, then, that at first, things did not go well for Americans in the West. American troops not only failed to take Canada, but were also forced to surrender some American land. Then came a big surprise. America's first victory came on water rather than on land. The United States had a small fleet on Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes. Great Britain had a larger one. The American fleet was commanded by Oliver H. Perry. Perry was only 28 years old, but he had served in the Navy since he was 14. In September 1813, Perry's fleet defeated a British naval force on Lake Erie, forcing it to surrender. Perry then sent this message to the American general in the region: "We have met the enemy and they are ours." The next year, 1814, started out badly for the Americans. Great Britain's main enemy had always been France, but in 1814, the French armies surrendered to the British. That was not good news for the United States. It meant that the British could now turn their full attention to fighting the Americans. That summer, a British fleet sailed into Chesapeake Bay in Maryland with several thousand troops. Their mission was to destroy the American capital city, Washington, D.C. Residents of Washington fled into the countryside ahead of the arrival of the British troops. But Dolly Madison, the president's wife, coolly remained at the White House until she had arranged to save important government records and a fine painting of George Washington. Only then did she and the last of the White House guards leave. She left just hours before the Redcoats arrived. When British soldiers burst into the empty White House, they found the dinner that had been prepared for the Madisons. British officers enjoyed the fine food. Then the troops went through the place, destroying everything in their path. Finally, they set fire to the White House, the Capitol, and many other government buildings. The next day, a hurricane hit Washington, adding to the damage. Luckily, the heavy rainstorm that followed put out most of the fires. From Washington, the British marched to Baltimore. At the same time, the British fleet bombarded Fort McHenry at the entrance to Baltimore's harbor. The attack lasted all day and all night, but the Americans held out. That attack inspired Francis Scott Key to write the U.S. national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. And here it is. You know the words to it. "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, while the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?" Tomorrow we're going to spend the whole social studies time talking about the Star-Spangled Banner. Near the end of 1814, the British tried to capture the city of New Orleans at the mouth of the Mississippi River. A British fleet landed 7,500 soldiers near the city. General Andrew Jackson, commanding a tough band of 5,000 militia and frontiersmen, remember a lot of them were from Tennessee, was waiting to meet the British. Pirates also helped defend New Orleans. Jean Lafitte was the leader of a band of pirates. Lafitte persuaded General Jackson to use his men and their cannons against the British. The last attack of the battle began on January 8, 1815. Wave after wave of redcoats attacked the American defense. Each wave was thrown back with heavy losses to the British. After the defeat, the British retreated to their ships and left. The Battle of New Orleans was the final battle of the War of 1812. In fact, it actually took place after the war officially ended. News traveled so slowly on those days that the two armies did not know the governments had already signed a peace treaty 2 weeks earlier. In that peace treaty, each side just kept the same territory it had before the war. So one way of looking at the outcome of the war is that neither side won. It's true, neither side did win, but the Americans did have some gains to show for it all. They had shown themselves and the world that even if they could not defeat mighty Great Britain, they could certainly hold their own. In addition, the British stopped providing guns to Native Americans in the West. That was one of the goals of the United States. So all in all, the United States could feel satisfied with the outcome of the war. However, Native Americans at this time did not feel satisfied. For them, the war and the end of British support broke the back of their resistance to American settlement and expansion in the West. They lost important leaders and many warriors. The rise of this young nation was at the same time threatening the survival of the Native American people who'd lived on American soil for hundreds of years, long before European explorers had ventured across the Atlantic Ocean. So there's another text on the War of 1812, Mr. Madison's War. Got a few questions to answer about it today. After these 3 texts, I hope you've learned a lot about the war and know more about it than you did before anyway. Like I said, we'll have a test on it, on Lewis and Clark, and on President Washington next week. So go answer these questions, and you'll be done with social studies for today. Tomorrow's a super easy lesson. We'll see you then.